Hello, in this episode of Quick Start for Bounce Factory, we're going to talk about how to customize Bounce Factory to make your life easier. There are two different ways to do this. One is by using presets within the app, and the other is by filling in information either from the last snapshot or something like that that's happened within the app recently, or by saving your data to disk and then reloading it. So let's start with the presets. You'll notice at the top of the Bounce Mix dialog within the Take Snapshot window that you've got the 5 preset buttons, which should be familiar to you from Pro Tools. And these start life as being exactly the same as the Pro Tools presets, but they also contain information about all of the extra settings, like whether or not you want to play something on a destination track, whether you want to export, what kind of format you're exporting, and that sort of thing. If you already have presets in Pro Tools, the first thing you can do is import Pro Tools presets, and it will open up the Bounce dialog, go through all the presets, and then those are now imported into Bounce Factory. And you can see as I go through them, it will change what's going on, including the additional sources. Just want to point that out. So preset 1 is an MP3 with 1 active source. Preset 5 is an MXF with 5 sources. And if I look at the 5 sources, there they are. Now, when I recall, it actually does check the session and make sure that those sources exist. And if it doesn't, it won't assign them. So you're not going to be bouncing something that's impossible, which is always a good thing. The other thing is, you'll notice, like, let's say we go back to MP3 here. There are presets here within the MP3s. So if we say that booty bass, let's save this as preset 1. And then we recall preset 2, there's nothing. Okay, so in preset 2, let's make this ambient. Oh, samba, why not? Okay, then as I recall preset 1 and 2, we'll see our genre switch from ambient to booty bass and close this. And then if I am, let's go back to a wave here and we'll export as an MP3 here. Go into the MP3 export settings, and those are available inside of either MP3 dialog, but they're not overwritten. I've just recalled preset 1 for the entire dialog, and then we'll say, let's go ahead and make it so we can export again and have a look at the MP3 settings. That has not overwritten how we had this set up. So the presets are separate within these dialogues, and you have the same inside of the movie dialog, because those are settings that are specific to that type of export, not necessarily to every single thing you're setting up. The other thing is, I just want to briefly go through all of our fill from buttons. We looked at those in one of the earlier videos. The 3 places you can fill in data are the last snapshot, session settings, and selected track. Selected track is very simple. There are really 2 places where it works. If we hit a track that's selected in the session and hit the T button next to the destination track, assuming that we are importing the mix, it will then change the setting to existing track and to place it on the print track. So we didn't have to go through the pop-up list and find print track, which wouldn't be that hard. We can just select the track and hit the T button. What's good about this is, let's say we're not even importing at the moment. If we hit the T button, it will turn on all of the options that are necessary for us to be able to do it. The only other place you can use the print track is for file name, where it will take the name of the track and put it into the file name, or the mix source. When you select a track and hit mix source, it will say, do you want to use the input or the output of that track as your mix source? Great. Current session is to take the session name, put it as the file name, to set the sample rate to the session sample rate, which we saw earlier, or to use the session directory as the destination for the bouncing. In the export dialog, it is just that you can load the entire thing from the session. And what that will do is take the settings as the last export that was done from the session and fill them in. So if we do that from this session, they were filled in from Wave 44116, and it was not being exported. Go ahead and turn that on, and that has recalled those settings from the way the session was set up. Last snapshot, exactly the same thing. You can get the name from the last snapshot if you're doing a series of bounces that all have similar extensions on them or something like that just to get you your last snapshot bounce name. You can get the directory from the last snapshot. You can set up the export dialog from the last snapshot, or like we saw earlier, you can set up the entire dialog from the last snapshot you took, and that will set up the sources, it will set up whether you're importing or exporting, it sets up everything that it can, while validating that those settings will work with the session that's currently open. The other thing that we saw before was that you can load passes from the last snapshot. And if I do that here, that will actually work because we have a session that has similar sources and similar track names. So now I've had my mini snap from before, muted tracks, but now I've got my muted, solo, muted, and stems to give me instrumental, acapella, TV, and my basic stems. So that is a way to just import from data that's available to the app, either from the session or from the last snapshot you took. And the last snapshot data is retained when you close the app, so you can come back to it the next day and continue where you left off. But there is another way that you can save data, and it makes things quite powerful. What you could do, let's say you have different templates for different types of printing, and you're in your, I don't know, your record basic stems template. You know you've got all the VCAs. What I could do right now is let me delete the playlist pass and the mini snap, just cause. And let's say that these instrumental, acapella, TV mix, and basic stems are something that I need to use all the time. I don't want to rely on having just taken a snapshot that has them so I can load them from the last snapshot. What I can do is save the mix passes to a file on disk. So I'm going to call this, I'll just call it basic mix passes, right? Now, let's say I didn't have any of these set up. I'll go ahead and delete all these. Okay. Now that we have saved that file to disk, I can load those mix passes just like I did from the last snapshot, but at any time. I don't have to remember whether the last snapshot happened to be one where I used those passes. So I've got a snapshot here. The session is open. I'm going to say load passes from file. It's going to show me a folder. I'm going to find my file, which is right there, basic mix passes, choose, and it will go through the validation process again. And again, it will tell me that 4 MixPass entries were loaded, and now I have my instrumental acapella TV. And again, what I would need to do is make sure that I have the actual bounce names correct, because those will come in with the MixPasses, but it's up to you to then update them. But like we said before, all you have to do, double click on the single MixPass entries, and you can type a new name, or you can come down to the multiple MixPass entries, which would be a batch for stems. And then if you double click that, you're presented with the stem dialog so that you can rename. One other thing I want to show you is that there is actually a batch rename mode if you're dealing with multiple mix passes. You may have noticed earlier in a video that when we were editing multiple mix passes, the file name here said multiple, and that's because there's more than one file name. If we had clicked on that, we would have gotten a batch rename dialog. We can use that same batch rename here. So if we have imported these mix passes, and we want to rename everything but the stems to give the new song name, I can select all 3 of these particular mix passes and say rename pass. And instead of getting a dialog that just asks me to rename one, like if I double clicked here, I will get a dialog that will ask me to rename all 3 of them. It gives me an example of the first selected one. So right now we would be renaming Second Best Song Ever, R3 Instrumental Mix, to R3. And the reason is because we've got to find and replace. But let's say what we really want to do is just change the song title. So Second Best Song Ever, we want to change this to Even Better Song. And it shows you the Second Best Song Ever, R3 Instrumental Mix, will be Even Better Song, R3. Oh, and then let's say, but that one is actually on R5. And so then we would just change this, and now we would have our correct names. And now all 3 of these have been renamed with the new session name, and we're good to bounce. The last thing I want to show you is that you have that same ability to export and import the actual snapshots you've taken. So this isn't data to help you make new snapshots, but let's say you're printing Atmos stems for a record. So you've got 200 mix passes all save for the same record. And then there's a recall for one song, and you need to redo all of those stems. The last thing in the world you want to do is to have to remake all the stems. So quite often, when I've set everything up for a record, what I'll do is I will say export. And then I can save all of the mix passes. Let's call this, we'll call this quick start. And it's a snapshots file, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now that's on disk just the way the mix passes were saved into an encapsulated file that you can load back into Bounce Factory. So I'm going to go ahead and delete everything here. It's okay. I'm going to delete everything. Now they're gone. A week has gone by. I get a call. They need to turn the hi-hat up, but because of the way the hi-hat was hitting some sidechain stuff, I now have to reprint all of my stems for a particular song. I can say import, and I can select the file, which we called quick start. I'm going to select that, bring it in, and now here are all of them. And then I can say, well, let me go into group mode, and I don't need to reprint this guy, so I'll go ahead and delete that. And now I can reprint this song, and in fact, I only need to reprint the stems, and I can say bounce selected, and I can reprint my stems.